Hello guys, this is CannibalChess, and in this video I'm just going to be going over a game that I had Mittens and Hikaru bot play against each other just to see who was stronger, or also just seeing what level Mittens was actually at, because she's definitely not rated 1 elo. So Hikaru with the white pieces goes e4, Mittens plays e6, the French defense, and then Hikaru brings his knight out to c3, all theory. Mittens plays d5, striking in the center of the board. And then Magnus, instead of taking, plays d4. Mittens plays knight f6, and then this is kind of baiting the move d5, which Hikaru plays, closing the pawn structure here, and then Mittens reroutes the knight to d7, so probably trying to push c5 at some point, and then just having extra defense on that square. And then here Hikaru continues by rerouting his knight as well, because he's seeing that yes, Mittens is going to try and push this at some point. He wants to have his pawns ready to attack and defend as well. And then here Mittens does indeed push c5. This is all theory still. Hikaru plays c2 or c3, and then Mittens does not take. She just develops her knight to c6. I'm just going to go with Mittens being a she because it kind of looks like a she cat. So here Hikaru finds the best move, which is f4, just putting more defense on this square, and then also just creating more of a pawn chain. And then Mittens plays e7, making room for castling at some point, also trying to get the bishop to a more active diagonal maybe later if this does not open up, which it probably will at some point. And then here Hikaru plays g3. Now the computer's liking this move, knight to f3 instead, trying to get the knight active, maybe trying to jump to this square at some point, seeing if Hikaru will take, and then you can retake and kind of open up the file after you castle as well. Might be a decent idea for Hikaru here. And then Mittens does finally indeed take the pawn. So instead of taking with his pawn, Hikaru takes with the knight. The engine's liking the pawn takes move instead. It's just keeping the pawn structure just more solid. But Hikaru takes with the knight. It's just the second best move. Not too bad. And also the game is still exactly equal. So here Mittens continues with bringing her knight to c5, just wanting to put it on this outpost, possibly on e4 would be a nice square for the knight. Hikaru brings his other knight out now, and then makes this defensive kind of square around the knight. So they're both defending each other now. The knight's also being defended by the pawn and the queen. And then here Mittens does take the knight, and then Hikaru takes back with the pawn, but the computer here is liking this move, knight takes now, because the difference is that whereas before over here taking with the knight was not as good, because then Mittens can take back possibly, and then after Hikaru takes back, then there's no outpost for this other knight. But now because he moved this other knight over here, Mittens takes, and then now this outpost is there for the knight. There's no other knight to come and then take this knight off of that outpost. So that's why the chess engine saying that taking with the knight would have been a better option, just creating an outpost for Hikaru's knight here. So Mittens puts her knight on the e4 outpost, and then Hikaru brings his bishop a little bit more into an active square to d3, trying to get this outpost, or this knight on the outpost, off the board. And then here Mittens finds the best move, which is queen a5 check. And then here Hikaru does a very strange move, not a very good move at all, but he moves his king to f1, so he now cannot castle, and this just gives Mittens a little bit of an edge in the position. The engine is saying you should have just blocked with the knight, and then this in turn would have also put more pressure on this centralized knight, so that would have been the better option for Hikaru bot here. But he plays king f1. Mittens continues by activating her light squared bishop to d7, trying to get it on this diagonal possibly. And then here Hikaru continues by playing queen e2, trying to get the queen a little bit more active, also pressuring the knight some more, and then also maybe creating sort of a battery on this square. At some point Mittens is probably going to try and storm the queen side with these pawns, and so Hikaru wants to have a little bit of defense on this square in case he wants to start pushing his pawns as well, possibly. So that's what that move is for. And also maybe if he does want to play this move, or if he wants to bring his bishop here at some point, then this pawn would then have defense because the queen moved there. So there's also that in the position. And then here Mittens continues by instead playing a6 instead of castling. Castling would have been better here. Hikaru can't castle, so it's time basically to attack. But Mittens finds a different way of attacking, which is just to start pushing the pawns, which is also fine. It's the second best move. And here Hikaru continues by developing the dark square bishop to this more active diagonal, hitting Mittens' queen here. So Mittens drops the queen back, doesn't really want to give up the knight for this bishop. The knight is actually doing very well where it is, just hitting all of these squares. So it's a very active knight. It's a very good knight. And so Mittens doesn't want to trade it for a lesser than bishop, basically. So she just drops the queen back to b6. And then Hikaru finds the best move, which is just king to g2, making room for the rook to come over. Also, just connecting the rooks in general is a good idea. But now this rook could jump to this open c-file as well and kind of cause trouble for Mittens here. So Mittens continues by castling, which is probably one of the best ideas in the position. Computer's liking this move just to try and deactivate this battery that Hikaru bot made. So there is that. And then Hikaru finds the best move, which is to just put the rook that was on h1 on c1 and then take control of this open c-file. And then Mittens instead, the computer, and probably, most people, like when I saw this move, I was like, well, the obvious move is to move one of the rooks over. You always want to contest your opponent's control of an open file, especially if it's the only open file in the game. It's really important to have control of the only open file. But Mittens here just lets Hikaru have the open file and plays bishop b5 instead. And this idea should have been played a few moves ago. It's kind of too late now to play this idea. And then Hikaru takes advantage of it, just trades on b5. And it's interesting here that pawn takes was the better move, the computer's saying. I'm sure it would have been the same if the queen took, then probably Hikaru bot would have traded queens and then just made the double pawns anyway. So I'm pretty sure they're basically the same move, kind of. Queen takes or a takes is probably interchangeable. So after pawn takes, Hikaru continues by pushing a3, and I'm sure he's just trying to push his pawns, trying to also make it to where this bishop can't come up to this diagonal now because the pawn's guarding that square as well, something like that. And the computer's saying that bishop to e3 would have been a better move, I guess, trying to defend this backwards pawn a little bit more to make sure that this pawn doesn't become a pass pawn at some point, I'm guessing is what the computer is saying. But that also, it kind of deactivates the bishop and doesn't make it to where it has any more defense of this diagonal. So it's kind of a strange find from the chess engine. But after Hikaru plays a3, Mittens goes rook a4, bringing the rook up, and the computer is still liking this move. Rook to c8, contesting the open c file, the rook that's on the open c file. But Mittens wants to go after this pawn, try and get a pass pawn, and then win the game. So, and then maybe, so she could maybe go for this, and then create a better pawn chain, and then undouble the pawns on the b file as well. So Hikaru now finds the best move, which is bishop to e3. Finally sees the threat of the rook taking the pawn and kind of busting open the the pawn chain here, messing up his pawn structure. So Mittens continues by playing rook to c4, finally blocking Hikaru's rook from having full control of the c-file. And then Hikaru reroutes his knight to d2 to just attack this strong knight on the outpost, and then also attack Mittens' rook here. So I think Hikaru's kind of wanting Mittens to take the rook possibly, and then play something like that maybe, or also, yeah, just trade rooks and then just continue to have control of the c-file would be best for Hikaru here. But instead, Mittens finds an amazing move, which is just knight takes on d2. So at this point, the Hikaru's knight became a better piece for Hikaru here, because it's now attacking two of Mittens' most important pieces. So it's got to go. So Mittens just simply takes it, and then after queen takes, Mittens doubles up the rooks on the c-file. So now Mittens kind of has more control over the c-file. And then here, Hikaru continues by pushing his b-pawn down to b3, just kind of contesting the rook, basically saying, are you going to move back with the rook, or are you going to take the rook on c1? And Mittens decides to move back to the best square possible. Now Mittens is looking for Hikaru to take, and then after Hikaru possibly takes, then probably undouble the b-pawns maybe. But also the b-pawns are actually kind of good doubled, because they're now definitely stopping the advancement of those two pawns. So that's actually something good about having doubled b-pawns in this situation. But Hikaru continues by playing queen d1. The computer's saying something like pawn push to g4 would be better, trying to break open the kingside would be a better idea, something like that. But okay, Hikaru plays queen d1. Mittens plays f5, and this is a very bold move, because what it allows is an en passant, and this is what Hikaru plays. And so this is kind of opening the file in a good way for Hikaru here, because now the bishop could potentially move over here, and then also the queen or the rooks could start hitting this backwards pawn. So this is actually a good thing for Hikaru here. So Mittens retakes with the bishop, and the computer's saying that either of these moves would be fine in this position. I'm kind of liking the bishop takes move a little bit more, because it's hitting this weak pawn, and you just want to remain in control of the c-file if you're Mittens here. So the bishop to f6 move is probably better, just by a little bit in my opinion. And then here Hikaru takes, and then Mittens retakes, so now Mittens has full control of the c-file. And then, yes, of course, so the computer's saying you should, as Hikaru, you should play rook to c1 to contest this Mittens control on the c-file again, because that's a very strong thing to have in positions like this where there's not very many open files. So you should contest it immediately, but Hikaru doesn't. He just plays queen to d3, and probably just trying to get the queen on this diagonal, so the pawns can't really go up, because then the queen would be able to go to something like f5. And then also maybe hit this pawn as well, so the queen can't really move around too much, because then the pawn would just be taken. So that's probably what Hikaru was seeing here. And then Mittens just moves queen to a6, probably trying to pressure Hikaru if he does this, because then you might have some kind of tactics after it takes, then kind of forcing a queen trade, maybe something like that is what Mittens is seeing possibly. And then Hikaru just goes back to d1, and maybe seeing, well, Mittens is probably not going to push the pawn, because that would be a bad move, so I'm just going to try and get my queen over here instead, also defend this pawn at the same time, and then maybe defend this square as well from the rook coming up. So those are all very good things in this move, queen to d1, which is probably why it's the best move. And then here Mittens just calmly plays queen to a5, just slowly making the queen a little bit more active in the position here. Now she's actually hitting an open diagonal, so that's a little bit better for Mittens. Hikaru continues with a4, trying to push for an advantage. Mittens, instead of taking, plays g6, so she's trying to make a little bit more of some counterplay on the king side to just keep Hikaru busy here. Hikaru plays bishop to d2, hitting the queen. Queen moves back, and then Hikaru takes the pawn. Queen takes, Hikaru plays bishop to e1, and it's kind of strange why this would be the best move, I guess. Oh no, yeah, it makes sense. Because here the queen and the bishop are hitting the pawn, but you can't really take the pawn yet, because if you take the pawn, then this pawn will take the rook. So after you take the pawn, and then Hikaru has to move the bishop out of the way, so the queen is still defending this pawn now. So I guess, yeah, that's the idea of moving bishop to e1. And then so the queen goes back to b6, so the queen and bishop are double attacking the pawn again. Bishop goes to f2 to defend it with the queen, and then Mittens brings her rook to the third rank. And this allows Hikaru to take control of the 8th rank, checking the king. King goes to f7, pawn goes to f5, just asking Mittens, do you want to take? Which pawn do you want to take with, or do you want to try and ignore it? Mittens takes with the e pawn, creates a pawn chain, and then Hikaru finds one of the only best moves in the position, which is queen to d2. And so this is attacking the rook, obviously. It's also hitting this weak h6 square. So the rook has to move. Once the rook takes the pawn, then Hikaru can play this queen h6 move. And it looks like Hikaru is much better here. The computer's still saying it's an exactly even game. And just so y'all know, this game, it does end in a drawish position, just so y'all know. So Mittens does not lose the game, but it does look pretty lost in this position here. So after that rook move and then queen move, then Mittens plays bishop to g7, trying to attack the queen. The queen just takes the pawn, and then Mittens plays queen to e6, getting control of this open file, and also keeping Mittens Hikaru from having any ideas of playing this, because after you play that now, then after the king moves, then you're fine here because of that queen move. So after Hikaru plays queen g8, then king moves, and then after another check, then Mittens is just able to defend again. And then here Hikaru picks up. So he picks up the h7 pawn. He also picks up the pawn on d5. So he now has a passed pawn, but so does Mittens. So it's still a very even game. Mittens wants to trade queens. Hikaru does. And then now Mittens' pawns are they're a little bit more all over the place than Hikaru's. But she also does have 2 passed pawns now. So Hikaru swings his rook over to the e file, trying to go after the pawn. King goes up. Hikaru pushes g4, and then the king takes, but then also Hikaru takes the e4 pawn. So the king goes back. Hikaru moves his rook to hit the bishop and also this pawn. The bishop attacks the rook. Rook pins the bishop to the king. And then here Mittens decides to try and promote the pawn to a queen. And then Hikaru does the same. But then Mittens wants to stop Hikaru from promoting. Hikaru continues by bringing the bishop down, and this is very standard in game ideas here. You want to bring your bishop over here to defend the pawn when Hikaru decides to push d6. So here Mittens continues by attacking the pawn again, but then there's this idea where Hikaru basically momentarily gives up the bishop, but then once the king takes, then he will just pick up Mittens' bishop, and then once the king moves again, then just pick up this other pawn. So Mittens does decide to go for that, and then now the position is very drawish. They both just go and try to promote, to a queen, and then they both just stop each other's rooks. They both promote to the queen, and then in this position, I just stop the game because it's basically exactly an even game. It's basically a draw. No one's gonna win or lose. So, and also after I stopped the game and then analyzed, it actually turns out that the accuracy was 97.4 for Mittens and then 97.2 for Hikaru. So Mittens' accuracy was just a little bit higher, but Hikaru did have 35 best moves to Mittens' 32 best moves. So his best moves were a little bit higher. His inaccuracies were 5, Mittens was 2, so a little bit of an advantage to Mittens here. But basically, they kind of seem like the same chess engine just because of how close they were in skill level. So I would put Mittens' rating at probably about 28, 30, something like that. So if y'all liked the video, please consider subscribing to the channel, and thanks for watching.